When we think about CTV, we think about over-the-top television. We think about television over the web and how that is growing and how that's becoming a part of all of our lives, whether it's streaming, whether it's over the internet. It's just everywhere in the world. It's an important conversation. So I'm really grateful to our partners at IAS, who was, excuse me, also our partners at IAS, who was also a gold partner today at our summit. Thank you, IAS. Really appreciate you guys partnering with us for the year. And I want to introduce Megan, who's going to bring up her panelists. She's moderating a session on CTV and helping understand CTV in this market region. Come on, Megan.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
good to meet you too. Please have a seat. Thank you. Nice to see some of you, and nice to see Hemant in person. He's been a real trooper for us. He's done a lot of these events virtually, and it's good to see you in person. A mask off too.
Yeah, mask off too.
Mask off too. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Excellent. Thanks, Rob. And hello, everyone. So I'm Megan. I'm the programmatic lead at Integral Ad Science. So today we have a couple of great topics on CTV that we'll be talking through. So we'll certainly talk about the growth of CTV, some strategies that marketers can implement to really drive effective CTV strategies and performance. And we'll talk about future innovations as well. So I'm joined by three panelists. So we have Hemant. He's the performance marketing lead at Dentsu. We also have Fai, the data partnerships director at the Trade Desk. And we have Brian. Brian's the programmatic performance lead at HP. So thank you very much for joining us today. I thought I'd kick things off, given that we are talking around CTV today. I thought I'd start with a bit of an icebreaker. So Hemant, we'll start with you. What's your favorite TV show that you're watching at the moment?
Honestly, I watch two shows parallelly. So one is like an always-on campaign, which is Friends. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the show. The second one, I'm recently watching Fodder, which is about like these special operatives in the Middle East. The thing I love about it is that it's really raw, like the production is really raw, and it's like minimal drama. So it really gets me going, you know. Yeah.
Nice, very nice. Have to add it to the playlist.
Yeah.
Fai, what are you watching? Do you have any recommendations for the audience? Something that they shouldn't miss?
Yeah, actually, it's a little bit of the kind of like the common like choices. I actually have been watching a Chinese drama, actually by iQIYI. So it's a funny story about like how a female like engineer or what is way up to the kind of corporate world. And so every year, actually, I watch a number of Chinese drama shows to just get myself like keeping myself abreast with what's going on in China, and also, most importantly, brush up my Chinese.
Interesting, very interesting. Great to hear. And Brian, from yourself, any recommendations or TV shows you're watching at the moment?
I've been watching Drive to Survive, the Netflix show about Formula One, because I just love how they showcase the intricacy and the drama of Formula One and the drivers that they go through. So I'm really keen on that.
Excellent. I have to ask, are you planning on going to the F1 this year? It's finally coming back.
If it comes back, for sure. I already sent the I'm interested email.
Excellent, excellent. Now, I actually wanted to ask the audience a question. We're very fortunate that we do have a live audience today. So can I please have a show of hands? Who owns a CTV device and streams CTV content at home? Or on the road? We're pretty fortunate with CTV. It's one of the benefits is accessibility. Excellent. Interesting. So it's actually the majority of the room. I actually wanted to ask a follow-up question. So out of everyone who does watch CTV, how many of you have actually made the switch from traditional TV? You've cut the cord and you actually only stream content via connected TV devices now. Interesting. About, what will we say, 30–40% of the room for the viewers at home that can't be here today. There was actually a recent survey by DigiDay, a recent study, which found that 58% of marketers have actually shifted their traditional TV budgets over towards CTV now, given the rapid growth that we've seen in that space. So I did want to talk a little bit about the growth that we are seeing in CTV. But before we do that, I actually wanted to ask you, Hemant, what, as an advertiser or as an agency, what would you define as CTV? We had a really interesting discussion over lunch today about what CTV means specifically in our region versus other regions as well.
Yeah, so I mean, as how we look at CTV is that CTV is essentially the device that actually, which is the consumer-facing device that actually helps the consumer stream content. So that's what I define as CTV. I know that there are a lot of definitions floating around, but yeah, that's the standard definition we go ahead with.
Yeah, interesting, thank you. And Fai, would you say, coming from the trade desk from a DSP perspective, would you consider CTV to have the same sort of meaning, or are you looking at it in a different way?
Yeah, so we actually look at CTV in a kind of a broader sense. It's a little bit more a combination of the traditional definition of the CTV having a device and watching on your TV, streaming on your TV. We combine them with more or less the OTT type of like streaming and content consumption. So our view of it is a little bit broader, and because over the region, I think different market actually have a very different dynamics and landscape. So some region actually is very big on streaming on the TV, some is very big on streaming on the mobile devices. So for us, it's easier to explain to our clients and agency advertisers. We pretty much at this point actually consider them together, like OTT, CTV as one category.
Makes sense, makes sense. And to follow up from that, obviously, we know that CTV is rapidly growing throughout the industry. So I would like to ask you, what do you think is driving the rapid growth and the shift from traditional TV and linear TV buys towards streaming content?
Yeah, sure. I think on a macro level, I think it's no surprise that there's a growing group of like digital natives. And this group of people actually grew up with very less exposure to linear TV. And they kind of the preference on when they go to content consumption is usually like content like on demand. Right? So as this group of people actually growing kind of the size in the population, you can see that kind of like a natural shift, right, of people doing linear TV like to CTV or OTT. So in fact, actually one of our study actually we show that over the past year, and we actually see some raise of hands to see actually who actually are people are completely cutting the cord, right? So our study showed that about 29% of the OTT or CTV viewers actually has completely cut the cord. And among these 29%, if you just look at the Gen Z generation, which pretty much actually mimic the digital native kind of like profile, 37% of them completely cut the cord. So I think it's that shift in the demographics and their content consumption profile and behavior really making a massive shift of the eyeball and also budget to CTV.
Thank you, Fai. Now, Hemant, it would be great to hear from the agency perspective. How do marketers look at CTV? Do they consider it to be a part of their traditional TV budget, or are they looking at it differently?
I would say yes and no to that. I mean, that's the short answer, right? But essentially, of course, like Fai says, CTV definitely it's a growing space. Everybody knows it. I mean, even Google in the Q4 earnings, call, they said that CTV and commerce are their growth drivers. So it's very much there and it's real, right? But I also feel that CTV as a space is really misunderstood. I mean, A, because there's a lack of clarity on the definition. And B, I think, like the way CTV works in every market across APAC is very different. So to kind of, put it in context, Australia, for example, there's high penetration of internet, high penetration of smart TV, CTV, and therefore the monetization rate also is really high for this penetration. And advertisers have more opportunities to actually tap into that audiences, that are consuming the content on CTV. And I think because of that, Australia as a market, they look at CTV in conjunction to traditional TV budgets versus Southeast Asia, which is still low on penetration with respect to smart TVs. It's growing, definitely, we're going there, but it's still pretty nascent. The markets have not achieved full potential of even the internet penetration, and the monetization is also low. And of course, again, like I said, we are getting there, but it's still low, right? And therefore, when it comes to CTV, advertisers usually look at CTV from a very digital lens. Now, while that mindset is okay for now, but in the long run, that mindset will limit a lot of things. That's what I feel. It'll limit us to kind of explore the full potential of CTV, because we will be limited on how we look at creative communication testing, audience testing, etc. Right? So that's the Southeast Asia region. But Japan, of course, I won't get into it, but Japan is like a different ballgame altogether. Yeah, so that's what I feel. So the short answer is it depends on the markets.
Yeah, absolutely. And how long do you think it will take for the TV budgets to move in?
Honestly, I mean, given the trends and given the numbers, I feel that it'll take at least 1 to 2 years before we actually get there. It depends a lot on us as a collective. It's not only one element in the ecosystem playing a role. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Brian, I would like to ask you from a marketer's perspective, obviously we're seeing rapid growth in the CTV space. How are marketers actually defining ROI in CTV?
That's a good question. I think similar to Hemant and Fai's topic, it is a very fragmented market, especially when we talk to CTV across the different countries. We usually think of CTV as an endemic advertising execution specific to that market, where you really have to look at the different markets and what's also available from a CTV, but also from a media outlet approach. Similar to the conversation of Australia being different from Indonesia, you have to pick the right CTV partners for the right goal. For example, when we look at running for more of like a B2B audience, news and current affair partners are much more relevant compared to using into like B2C would be more of a lifestyle channels. I think for us, when we try to bring it back and try to define what success here is, it's similar to our video execution. It allows us to get premium publishers at an effective way. We have all the measurement that we get with similar to the video, but at the end of the day, it's making sure that we're using CTV the right way to drive like brand impact metrics in a positive way.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. So we've touched a little bit around the growth of CTV, how marketers are actually defining success and how they're measuring success. So I'd actually now like to talk a little bit about CTV strategies. And specifically, Fai, do you have 3 top tips for how marketers can actually set up their CTV programmatic campaigns for success?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So CTV or OTT is probably not the newest kid on the block, but it's still fairly new. So we constantly explore this topic with our clients, with the agency, and also with our customers. So I would suggest like our audience to consider like these 3 main points. First is think beyond reach. Second is think about the media quality. And then the third one is rethink your media mix. So what do I mean by that? So I think a lot of time when people talk about TV and the reach is the top #1 metrics people looked at. And we think that actually when we look at the reach number, other than just the quantitative term, we should also think about the qualitative part of reach as well. So we all know that in reach, not all reach or impression or video play are created equal. So I think we should more strategically look at what type of content that we are buying, dissect the content, and also look into the specific KPI for the content that we are actually buying. So I give probably one of the example, myself, I'll put it as an illustration. So I watch a lot of like videos like online, just like many of you. I probably watch when I actually do jogging, when I walk out, or I even do household chores. And I think I have to probably just quote unquote this watch. So they probably consumed about like 70–80% of the content I actually watch, right, through this type of casual content consumption. On the other end of the spectrum, I watch TV dramas, I watch TV or actually movies, usually on a Saturday, Sunday night, and when my kids are all asleep. The consumption or the screen time is very, very small compared with the casual content consumption, but definitely much higher quality. So I think this actually is probably mimic a lot of what you guys actually have been doing as well. And in fact, we recently conducted a cross-media study, and that actually showed that the CTV and OTT viewers, they actually on average, right, about 67% less likely to do multitask as compared with like casual content consumption. So I would suggest the audience to think about, go beyond the reach number, right? Think about the quality of the media that people are consuming and really like reallocate your budget, like according to not just the quantitative number, also the qualitative part of the content.
Thank you, Fai. Some good tips there, and I'm sure the audience can take a lot of those tips away with them today, so appreciate it. Now, Hemant, I'd like to come to you. And I'd just like to understand from your perspective, how are you actually targeting your CTV audiences? Are you using a more traditional TV method, or are you taking a more targeted digital approach?
I'll first start with saying that I'll probably refrain from using the word CTV audiences, because I mean, technically these are the same guys that you can reach out to on other platforms as well, right? So you know, they could be on the mobile device simultaneously while they're browsing content on CTV, right? And therefore I'll go back to my base definition of CTV being like this consumer-facing tech or device that actually enables you to stream content across different content partners, right? So now, specifically what we've done is we've taken a two-pronged approach to CTV. So we call it, one is CTV Plus, which is essentially where we look at OTT and YouTube content together, because these content types can be streamed across platforms, right? So there's a merit in looking at them from a single lens rather than, you know, in silos. So that is one. Second is, you know, the second leg to this is that we look at working with distribution partners, so, you know, Samsung, Panasonic, etc. So all of them to actually come up with, you know, some kind of ways of reaching out to the consumers who are consuming content there. Now, from a targeting standpoint, this is the approach, right? So now from a targeting standpoint, essentially we've partnered with the premium OTT content players, and we are even doing that within the YouTube ecosystem, you know, partnering with different channels and actually piping them via our solution called Curate. So that's from a content standpoint. From an audience standpoint, we are trying to work with the larger industry partners to actually see if we can bring their data together with our data and actually sell it to our clients, or, you know, actually enable clients to be more addressable in this space. And the solution we have here is called Dentsu Audience Platform. So that's what we've been doing. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your insights there. Very, very good to hear from you. So next, I'd like to come to you, Brian. As a marketer in Asia Pacific, I would love to hear, what are two key challenges that you've been facing here? And specifically, are there any challenges that you find that we're faced with here in APAC that aren't necessarily challenges in other markets globally?
Yeah. So I think CTV adoption and users will follow the media spend as well. So like the example we were talking about in Australia, it's much more standard because you have the big TV channels that are also having these OTT partners. While when you compare it to something like Indonesia, Philippines, it's super fragmented. If you look into the US, it's so much more easier to say OTT. You got the Hulus and all these other ones that are much simpler to describe. Well, when we do it in APAC, I think one of the biggest things that always catches marketing teams, planners, and activation is like the drastic price of CPM, because CTV does come at a premium. So we need to define, so what we've been trying to do is really define that role of CTV within our marketing campaigns. And that is, if we have a defined objective, it's much easier to explain why CTV is important to reach our audiences in a premium environment. Yeah. I think with that, as we develop it, prioritization and planning is what's important when it translates that into a media objective. Because you can talk about all these partners and how they're very cool, but if you sway off what the media and marketing objective is, that's when it gets a little bit tricky. So at the end of the day, our market teams, our agencies, our partners is what we choose to provide success. So with the CTV approach, I think just really hammering the point that we have to use it at the right role for marketing objective, and that makes it much easier for us to say CTV is good and it's working for our campaigns.
Great, thank you, Brian. Now, Fai, I would actually like to come to you, and I'd love to hear from your perspective if you have anything to add on to there. And are there any challenges that you think that we've been facing here in APAC when it comes to CTV buys?
Yeah, so coming from a data perspective, I feel that the measurement piece actually is still very much, it's in the construction of development. So like I mentioned, it is still fairly new to probably most part of the industry, particularly in our region. So we have been working with our clients, the agency, and particularly some market research company to look at the content consumption behavior of CTV OTT and how does it interact with different type of a media as well. So I think coming from a data side, I think that the measurement piece and understanding the user behavior the interaction of different media pieces, actually that part is still a kind of like a emerging topic for us to explore.
And sorry to put you on the spot here, but what do you think that marketers can do to actually overcome that moving forward?
It's definitely a collaboration like between different kind of like players in the market. So the Trade Desk is a platform. We have a lot of data to understand what are the user behavior, where people click, how long people view different content. But at the same time, we work with agency and client because in order to understand the cross-media behavior is not just the execution or activation on the Trade Desk platform, but also the activation on our, let's say, YouTube, on Facebook, like on TikTok, like everywhere, right? So we have to have that holistic picture. So I really welcome that like cross-industry collaboration on that. And then Keep an Open Mind is a very new channel. So we love to work together with all kind of the audiences, like the panelists here, that to find out more about how we can actually nail it, right, for this new channel.
Excellent. Thank you, Fai. Thank you, Brian. Some interesting points there. So we've talked a little bit now around CTV strategies and how marketers can set their campaigns up for success. We've also spoken around some of the challenges, specifically here in the APAC market. I'd now like to talk a little bit about the future of CTV. We actually put out a recent study at Integral Ad Science lately, and it found out that actually 46% of respondents actually said that digital video holds the most potential for innovation. And Hemant, I'd love to hear from you. What exciting new trends or innovation have you seen either locally or globally in the CTV space?
Yeah, this should be an interesting one. So essentially, two innovations come to my mind, honestly. One was, so YouTube launched last year. YouTube launched this feature where you could press, like basically click on a link on your CTV ad, and actually it kind of opens up that same link on your mobile device. I mean, it was quite interesting because it was kind of moving away from disrupting the consumer experience into enhancing it. I mean, it's ironical, like, talk about it because I'm probably the person who's placing that ad in the first place. But essentially, that kind of opens up opportunities for brands also to establish that relationship with the consumer and actually enhance the experience rather than kind of kill it, right? So that's one innovation. The second one that comes to my mind is actually there's this company in the US which came up with an ad format which allows you to buy clothes within your CTV screen. So I mean, honestly, yes, definitely I understand CTV and all that, but I never thought that I would be able to buy clothes on my CTV monitor, right? It's weird, but yes, it's happening. So definitely, yeah, these are the two innovations I think will really change the way we work.
Great. It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing how fast this space and this industry is growing and innovating. And I'm sure if we have this conversation this time next year, you'll say something completely different again. So yeah, thank you. Thank you, Hemant. So I actually now wanted to come to you, Brian, and I wanted to understand, as a marketer, what different creative approaches are you seeing towards CTV, and how do you think this is changing?
Yes. From a media perspective, I think the simplest thing is like the video length. Because with CTV, it's a 15 to 30 second TVC spot. That's what we should be looking at. Because, within CTV, there's always a lot of troubleshooting. So if you don't get the video length right, then you got to go to the bit rate, the video size, and all these other things that make it more complicated to execute. From a media approach, like when we run CTV, we have to know the time and place that it's relevant. So 15, 30 second videos, that's what we should be looking at. And we found that as like the most efficient use of that channel, given that the CPM is expensive and everything that comes with it. From a creative approach, I think we should also stop looking to CTV as just kind of like an in-stream video outlet. There seems to be more and more technology partners that are coming in that are offering different creative execution, like what Hemant mentioned, and not just solely close it to just, it's my in-stream video. It's like step by step. We gotta make sure that we get the approvals and everything that goes with CTV. Then we can start adding in more creative as it comes in. But that's something we're also actively exploring.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Now, to finish off, I actually wanted to ask each of you, I wanted to talk a little bit more around the future of CTV and what role it will actually play. So, Fai, I'll start with you firstly. What role do you think CTV will play in the future, and how do you think we'll get there?
so we are really like living in an ever like a kind of like growing speed, right, toward the digital world. So I think it's not really a matter of if, but CTV will really dominate, right, or the kind of the TV media spend. So it's just a matter of time. So, but if you think about what will really drive this trend, I think the most recent news by Disney Plus, actually they rolled out the ad-supported subscription model. I think that actually is a very interesting trend, and then that potentially will really speed up the whole migration to CTV. It's not that this ad-supported streaming is very new to the industry, and particularly, I think this is not new to Asia, right? If you go to China, if you look at the video, watch the video, there is all full of ads, right? So, but for Disney actually put its weight behind this model, coming from the United States, and it really, I think, it give a very strong signal to the industry that we are moving to the ad-supported streaming. More inventory will coming down the stream, and I think the speed over to the CTV world from the traditional linear TV will likely to be much faster.
Thanks, Fai. And Brian, from a marketer's perspective, what role do you think that CTV will play in the future?
I think it goes back to using CTV or channels or OTTs as proxy, like with the cookies gone and everything. They're becoming again proxies for reaching the right audience. Like if we think way back, way back when you'd buy an ad in a fashion magazine or a car magazine, we're going back to that level, and with all the elements of measurement and everything, we can come back to that space where we're looking at CTV partners or CTV channels as a proxy for audiences with all the right backup and making sure that we're all brand safe and everything.
Thanks, Brian. And Hemant, over to you. Do you have anything to add? What sort of a role do you think CTV will play in the future, and what do you think it will take us to get there?
Honestly, I feel connectivity will play a role, like a big role, especially the Internet of Things, as our industry calls it. I mean, it's a fancy word, but essentially this is what it means, right? Like you are connected across devices at a given point in time, and you can actually navigate every device from the other device. So that's something I feel will be the future. Yeah. So, but to get there, I mean, we have to still figure out a lot of other things as an industry.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's certainly interesting to see how this space will continue to grow and evolve. There's so many new innovations coming out, and I'm sure that will continue to progress as well. So we've talked about a couple of interesting topics today, namely the growth of CTV and how rapidly this technology is growing. We've also talked around some strategies that marketers can actually implement to help set their CTV campaigns up for success, some of the challenges in market as well locally here in APAC, and then the future and innovations as well. So I'd just like to thank our panelists, Fai, Brian, and Hemant. It's been a pleasure to have you here today. So if everyone could please join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you.